everybody. Welcome to the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. We are going to be taking a look today at wild horses. It's been quite a while since we've talked about them, and there have been some changes on the policy side as the situation on the range has continued to deteriorate.
Wild horses and burros, icons of the American West, free roaming since the time of the conquistadors and a part of our heritage. As such, they have been federally protected since 1971, but that protection has created a challenging situation for the Bureau of Land Management. Back in 1971, the population on the range was about 25,000 animals. As of 2018, that number has exploded to 88,000. A sustainable population that is in balance with wildlife and livestock is 27,000.
We're already seeing dramatic effects in key areas. You can go out into areas that the rangeland looks perfectly fine, but you can go into other areas that it's just hammered. And if we continue where we're going, we're going to see thousands and thousands of rangeland that is in critical condition that it's going to take decades to recover. And that's what we're really trying to focus on, is we can't keep closing our eyes to this issue, and we've got to address it. And we've got to come together, because it's other uses and other values, it's wildlife, it's recreation, it's private property rights that are being impacted now. It's huge.
The tools available for managing wild horses and burros are different than you would see for wildlife or livestock, because they are considered to be neither. They are federally protected wild horses and burros, limiting the options available for population control. The options that are available to the BLM for management are limited to adoption, administering birth control, or housing them in off-range pastures. Housing wild horses and burros in off-range facilities costs about $50 million per year, or about 2/3 of the annual budget for the BLM's Wild Horse and Burro program. Since 1971, 245,000 wild horses and burros have been adopted, a number destined to grow faster than they can place them. The challenge being, if left unchecked, the populations double every 4 years. The silver lining of an impossible situation is that groups who haven't agreed in the past see that they need to work together, or the situation will be worse all around.
We've actually seen parties that are so polarized and so far apart are actually coming together because of the challenges we're having with the high populations. We're seeing wildlife impacts to the point that we're getting groups come together like the Humane Society, American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, on the same stage as Farm Bureau and the National Cattlemen's Association, putting their signatures on a document that says we need to do something.
Today, at the 21st Annual Wild Horse and Burro Festival in Farmington, Utah, wild horses and burros are competing on a very different stage, as trainers of all ages show off animals they have worked with for 60 days to prepare for adoption, as a part of the Trainer's Incentive Program, or the Tip Challenge.
You can scratch on them like this, and the hind leg will come up, and just like a big dog. So they're a lot of fun. We like them.
Some horses, it takes, a week to be able to touch them and get moving with them. Others, it takes way longer. You just have to be patient with the horse and be consistent.
I got Rosie 60 days ago. We brought her home, and the first day I worked with her, she was pretty hesitant, but by the second day, she was letting me touch her. And like a week or so later, I had her caught, and I was grooming her and just working with her, and she just continued to get better every single day. I've worked with her about 40 days out of the 60 days I've had her.
For Lisa and her family, adoption has been a very personal experience, because she doesn't just work with wild horses and burros. She's adopted them.
I felt like I couldn't really fairly represent the Mustangs, and if I didn't have the own experience myself, and so for years we've owned our own, but it's been pretty special the last couple of years because my daughter participated in the extreme tip challenge as well, like we've seen today, and she's done really well. And the one thing that she's learned, I think the most, is she's probably learned more about herself than she has her horsemanship skills. I mean, they've improved, but she learned so much more about who she is and how to think through maybe a difficult challenge. If you keep asking a horse the same thing, you keep getting the same answer. And so what these Mustangs provide is an opportunity to think through the problem and work through it.
I feel like most people think wild horses can't be tamed, can't be touched, and I can say that they can because I've done it.
Dealing with the challenges on the range might not be so different from training a wild Mustang, and that it will require thinking through a different approach rather than continuing to ask the same questions. For the county seat, I'm Maggie Kay.
We'll continue with our county seat conversation with our guests in just a minute. We'll be right back.
There are meetings, and then there are gatherings. At the Davis Conference Center, we know the difference. Turn your event into something more than just another business summit. With over 70,000 square feet of flexible meeting space, state-of-the-art presentation amenities, and inspiring architecture, the Davis Conference Center is designed to deliver stellar results in a majestic setting. Take your convention to the next level. Schedule now at davisconferencecenter.com.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
Exploring is an innate part of being human. What if there was a place on Earth that explores your sense of touch, sound, breath, sight, all year long? So take your time and make it monumental. San Juan County, Utah's Canyon Country, is the place to explore your sense of adventure.
Make your next adventure at Bear Lake. The Bear Lake Valley has something for everyone, all year long. Scenery, skies, water, or wildlife. You'll find what you're looking for at Bear Lake. Bear Lake, where families play year-round.
Welcome back to the county seat. Our topic today, wild horses in Utah. Time for an update on it. As you can see from our story, the situation out on the range has deteriorated. In fact, our guest joining us today, Reg Johnson, who has, from department to department around the state, been following this for a number of years. Tammy Pearson, a Beaver County commissioner and a rancher who's seen this firsthand throughout the years. You've got wild horses on your property, right?
Yes, we've got the Frisco herd on our BLM permit.
So you guys have just recently returned from the summit, the Wild Horse and Burro Summit, where collaborative groups have tried to get together. We actually covered that on our show probably
2 years ago.
2 years ago. What has changed in the landscape since then?
Well, we've seen a significant increase in the herd size, even with BLM's best efforts last year to try to top off the population increase. They were able to gather, I think it was around 11,000 horses last year, but the population increase last year was around 17,000. So even with their very best efforts to get there, they were not able to reach that. So this year we're at 88,000. With this year's full crop, be pushing 100,000. And this year they're estimating maybe 4,000 to 6,000 is all they'll be able to take off the range. So we're very fast approaching that event horizon where even with all the money and helicopters, everything that they have, they would not be able to gather what the population increase is every year. So if we don't get ahead of this immediately, we're going to be in this exponential population growth that just takes off and we can't get
So it's at this tipping point where they'll actually take over the entire West, and we're going to see wild horses pushing into the urban areas. I mean, realistically, in a scenario, we did the math on it when we did that video a couple of years ago, and it was like by 2035, the whole Western Range was inhabitable if you gave the horses everything. Do we need to readjust the calculations? Is it growing faster than that?
Well, we just got back from Reno at the Free Roaming Equids Summit there, and we saw that. There are herds right outside of Reno and right outside of Carson City where they're coming down into those backyards and the landscape's being impacted.
Yeah, and they don't get paid for landscaping.
No.
They're getting, they're mowing lawns literally in town.
Wow, that is just incredible. So what has changed in the political landscape? Because there was the ranchers and the management side and the groups that saw this firsthand that said we've got to control it, and then there were the horse advocate groups on the other side 2 years ago there just didn't seem to be much meeting of the minds. Has that changed?
I think what's happened there is, you know, we've tried to educate, we've tried to spread that message, you know, talking in our own language and basically, you know, kind of preaching to the choir, people that are willing to listen to you, that are educated enough to make those decisions. And I think that there's that huge increase not only on the population but the degradation on the ground. And I think even the advocacy groups are starting to see that themselves. And it's always been the cow versus the horse. And you know, it's when we first started talking, I've been on that ground, I've seen this herd and the herds in Beaver County. I've been there for 36 years, so I can see that coming. And it's simple math. I mean, like you said, with your video from a couple of years ago, it's simple math. You can see that coming, but also those of us that are on the range, whether we're range managers or we're livestock specialists or whatever, we can see that little incremental growth, and you know, and it doesn't take much. I can count on my fingers what that increase is. But unless you understand that, you don't get it. But I think the advocacy groups now are finally, they've been on the ground, there's so much damage that they're finally seeing what.
And we're having some good conversations about that. State of Utah, state of Nevada, folks from Wyoming, Colorado, we've all been working on an agreement with Humane Society of the U.S., ASPCA, Return to Freedom, and some of the other horse advocacy groups.
Office.
And Chris Stewart's office, pulling an agreement together that I think's a real unique path forward that hasn't been done before. Both sides have finally agreed that there is damage occurring out there. There's this exponential growth that's occurring. And if we don't get ahead of it now, things in the future are going to get very ugly, both for the landscape and also for the horses. Once the landscape's degraded, then the horses will go, their body condition will suffer as well. Dr. Eric Thacker from Utah State said it well. You know, once a horse's body condition gets to that 1 or 2 stage, that means the rangelands have been impacted, degraded for at least 2 to 3 years. So that's something to think of, and we are starting to see that in some of these HMAs. The path forward has 4 basic tenets. We're going to be doing targeted gathers at HMAs that are over population and doing removals when we do those gathers. The real key is when we do a gather of these wild horses, though, they need to have population growth suppression strategies implemented. And those will be specific to the HMAs. If you're on a very large HMA, you're going to be looking at some permanent sterilization. That can be done by spaying or IUDs or some other ways that they can do those permanent sterilizations. If you're at a local herd management area, HMA, like the one at the Onakee out on the Pony Express Trail, you know, those horses are almost approachable. So you can easily dart those with PZP, the yearly contraception. So there's different herd areas will need some different management techniques, and we agree with the advocacy groups. We don't need to round up everything, we don't need to remove everything, but we need to manage them properly in their HMAs. And then when we do bring them off, remove them, the agreement is we'll put them into long-term holding. Now that is expensive, but Congress has asked for a humane path forward. That's why we've agreed that, okay, we'll put them in holding, and if Congress is willing, and the American taxpayer, and that's, we say Congress would pay for it, but it is the American taxpayer. If they're willing to pay for the long-term holding, then that's the solution we'll go forward with. And then the last thing is we're going to really ramp up the adoption process. And one of the things in Reno we were talking about is if we're going to have a viable adoption process, we have to have a viable product coming off of the range. So we really need to figure out how to have better genetics on the range, manage the genetics better, so that when we bring the foals off or the 2-year-olds that are the adoptable animals, they're an animal that people want and are sound, things like that.
You have just raised a whole bunch of questions. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and I'm going to come back and fire some of those questions because I got a lot of things going through my head. We'll be right back on this conversation on wild horses on the county seat.
I promised my son that if he got straight A's, we would take a guy's trip, just the two of us. We were riding on a trail outside a place called Minersville, Utah. There was so much to explore and the trail just kept climbing higher, right to the top of a mountain called Jack's Peak. We just stood there with the whole world below us, not saying much. In fact, not a word. Later, my son turned to me and said, "I love you, Dad." Suddenly, I realized we weren't just camping, we were connecting.
Welcome back to the county seat, talking about wild horses. An update today, if you will, with a recent summit taking place in Reno, Nevada. Reg, you just went through this entire list of a four-pronged approach. And there are a couple of questions that just went off like alarm bells in my head. One of them, everything's going into holding. We're currently at, what, $50 million price tab annually?
60
million. How are we going to handle an increase if we've seen 20,000 new horses a year and you start pulling them off the range? Are we even going to be able to find places for them?
That's a great question. That was part of the discussion we had in Reno, is looking at alternatives out there where we can house these horses. Some of the horse advocacy groups are interested in actually purchasing some large ranches and putting horses on them. They would be paid for it. But through their 501(c) status, they might be able to do that a little more cost effectively than just the general private property owners. In the Midwest, they're housing a lot of these. In the Midwest, you have the forage because you have the rainfall and the grasses and stuff that naturally come up. They're able to do it less expensively than they are in the West. So we're looking at all of these options, but it is pricey.
Are we displacing the cattle industry eventually in doing this?
So that's the challenge, and there's a lot of issue with that. That's going to be something that we have to look into. You go out to the Midwest, like Reg said, you're going to be talking long-term pastures and not necessary holding facilities like feed yards and stuff, because those confined feed yards are way more costly than what the long range is. But how's that socioeconomic, like you said, are you displacing cows, or are you taking feed that should have been for dairy or cattle feed yards? So it's already happening, right? But we're going to have to ramp it up. But if we don't ramp it up, there's not going to be anything left on the range, period. So you talked about the tipping point. We're already at that tipping point.
But the problem is, from my understanding, is that what you're doing with this plan is you're transferring it from the open range, but you're just moving the problem over onto pastured ranges, and eventually you'll have the same problem, won't you?
So it is a challenge. There's no doubt about it. We did some math. If you don't do anything, if you're not taking these animals off the range, by around 2035 to 2040, you're going to be at about 1.5 million animals on the range. Then you're going to have to do something. And if you try to house that many animals, then the price tag is, trillions of dollars. So the intent here is, as we gather, what we do is we implement population growth suppression strategies, contraception of every range.
But you've got to get to zero population growth, or it's going to backfire on you, right?
So if you were to graph this out, what happens is if you do just gathers and removals, populations still go up because you can't take them off fast enough and house them fast enough. If you just do contraception, same thing, it goes up. If you combine both, you do the math and you'll see they go up and then they come down, and then you can maintain them at AML. And so within 10 to 12, 15 years, those in holding, long-term holding, the cost will significantly come down. So it's not optimal because for 15 years or so, we're going to have some significant costs in holding these animals. But if we do both the removals and the contraception and combine those together, we'll get ahead of this game. We did a request to Congress this year for $50 million.
An additional
on top of the $80 million that BLM gets. We were very disappointed because right now it's at $6 million is what they've given.
Okay.
So we really need everybody out there to call their congresspeople and say, we're at that flashpoint. We're at the tipping point. If we don't get ahead of this game right now through the gathers and removals and through contraception of every range, this is going to get out of control. And so we hope everybody will reach out to their congresspeople and help us move this forward, which was a large part of our conversation in Reno. Was everybody realizes what the problem is. People need to pick up the phone and make those calls.
No.
The cost of doing nothing, none of us can afford that.
That's true. It still leaves one question. We're going to take one more break, come back, ask that question, and get your final thoughts here in just a minute on the county seat. We'll be right back.
Make your next adventure at Bear Lake. The Bear Lake Valley has something for everyone, all year long. Scenery, skies, water, or wildlife. You'll find what you're looking for at Bear Lake. Bear Lake, where families play year-round.
Mountains to explore. Adventure to be had. A town to fall in love with. Yes, all that in Park City, Utah. Start your adventure at visitparkcity.com.
All local products have a story of magical places, real people, and delicious recipes spanning generations. So go ahead and discover flavors you've never tasted and friends you never knew you had. Utah's own Discover Local Food.
Welcome back to the county seat, talking today about wild horses. An update. We probably should have had one before this. Reg, you said something a minute ago about the adoption side. I'm all in favor of adoption. I think adoption is a great route to the extent that it works. But you said something that I thought was extremely troubling. You have to improve the genetics on the range. That sounds to me like you're actually talking about introducing something onto the range to improve the genetics, because they tried that once, didn't they already?
If you look historically, that's exactly what these horses are from, right? They were cavalry mounts. They were freight animals. The ranchers were always improving the genetics on the range. Now, recently, you might have brought in a few animals, things like that. I don't think you need to do that. You have so many HMAs that have different genetics across the landscape. What you want to look for are some of those prime studs or prime mares that can be taken off of one HMA and taken to improve the genetics in a different area and to mix those genetics up. So I don't think we're looking at bringing in hundreds of fresh blood or anything like that.
And
It's
that
just
has been
managing it.
done. I mean, historically, through even the BLM's done that, especially in Utah. They've traded out some of that.
Cross-pollinating is
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
All right. Now, this all sounds like a great plan and it's in place, but what do we need to know about this going forward?
Okay, this is not a plan that's in place. So let me clarify that. This proposal is literally a proposal by a group of people that have, and it's a very divergent, I got to get on that language, very divergent group that's put this together with the advocacy groups, the
National Academies.
National Academies, the big coalition, the Wild Horse and Burro Coalition signed off on that. So that's like 18 national organizations. But it's a proposal to the BLM for a course for management. And it's just everybody coming together trying to find a better way.
And we heard things in Reno that were awesome that we need to incorporate into
Exactly.
here. So this is an ongoing plan. It's going to morph as we get better information and better ideas. And the Reno summit was great for providing some action items, for providing some great thoughts of things that could change in this plan. And we hope that as we adjust the plan, that we'll get more and more groups that are willing to say, hey, yeah, we really agree with where that's going.
But we don't have the Save the Horse groups at the table yet. Is that correct?
We do, actually.
We do.
They were at the summit.
They were actually at the summit. For a lot of the part, they were heckling, and some of the same groups that were protesting the last summit were there. By the end of the summit, they were kind of coming around a little bit, and I think we could get them there. One of the commitments that these groups have made that they're going to help with, like the adoption end of it, and try and promote more adoptions, because that's been just a tiny drop in the bucket. But there was a lot of super good ideas that came about of this, you know, on sponsorships and adoptions and different, like the training programs and stuff that they're doing, where they're actually getting mares, spaying them, training and selling them. There's 4-H programs that they're giving them a horse and they train it for a year, they turn around and they bring it back to a horse show, a competition, and these youth groups are selling that horse now. And I mean, and so, but those are the positive things that we need to be working towards.
Right, but they're just onesies and twosies. We've got 30 seconds left. What's the action item that the viewers watching this show need to do?
Call your Congress folks and tell them that we need to get ahead of this. Also, state legislators, the governor's office. We just need to bring this to the public and say it's got to be handled now.
Okay, let's work for another show to discuss this again in the future. Thank you very much for joining us. Remember, local government is where your life happens. Be involved, be part of the solution, share this with your friends, and we'll see you next week on The County Seat.